Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome to this week's Paideia In The Know. So we are at the Strand House in Manhattan Beach today, and I have the lovely Leslie Bruce with me. I'm so excited. We're so excited to have you here. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And today we are going to talk all things books. So we are going to talk about writing your book and getting that book published and selling the book and, you know, writing your book and moving to your island and drinking margaritas in the sand.
Yeah, that's the goal.
That's the goal. So, all right. So you're an amazing journalist. You've been on the New York Times bestselling list a few times. Can you share a little bit about your career with us and also what you're up to right now?
Sure. Like you said, I'm a New York Times bestselling author. I've co-authored 5 books, and they've all appeared on the list, which is amazing. And then I spent most of my career in journalism. I was a reporter and editor at Us Weekly for about 5 years, and then as an editor and writer at Hollywood Reporter for about 3 or 4. And then currently I started a couple years ago my own motherhood platform called Unpack.
Like on their Wi-Fi.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, hi. Sorry, the Wi-Fi went out. We're back.
I started a platform for modern moms to kind of connect over this sort of crazy journey into motherhood. And I just wrote a book, which is going to be out in September, called You Are a Effing Awesome Mom.
Hey, all right, that's awesome. So you've obviously written so many stories and told so many stories in so many different voices. Can you tell us a little bit about what you feel makes a great story?
Sure. I think that the answer to that is twofold. It is, first and foremost, there needs to be like conflict or tension or something for like the main character to overcome. I think, as I was saying to you, I recently heard this saying that, like, if you've ever heard the story about the boy who was born and had everything and could do everything and won at everything, it's a pretty boring story. That the stories that are the most interesting are the ones that are, you know, like Rocky and Rudy and Secretariat, and like the having to go through something to get to the end. And that always doesn't mean like having to have your story wrapped up in like a pretty bow. It means that like like stories like Gone Girl or like The Catcher in the Rye, like the endings aren't that happy, but there is a journey, there's an arc for your main character. And then I think the other thing is that there just needs to be some sort of the human connection. I think as readers you need to be able to connect and relate with your main character, even if they're not necessarily like the most likable people. There needs to be something authentic and true about that, because that is what's going to pull us in, is that we see some version of either ourselves or somebody that we know in what we're reading, and we can relate to it, that we can connect to it.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think that rings true when you're a publisher too. And I know that you've had so much experience publishing stories. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think publishers are looking for when they're reading a manuscript that helps that light go off in their head, that they're like, yeah, this is going to resonate with people, this is going to sell books, like this is the story we're looking to tell?
I think ultimately when it comes to publishers, I think that they're always looking for great stories, which I know is like so trite and like so easy to say, but at the end of the day, nothing trumps just a really well-told story, even if it's something that's like, you know, been told 100 times. You've all heard, like, whether it's like a fairy tale or Boy Meets Girl or, you know, some murder mystery, like there's a million of them, but if you have a really good story, nothing trumps that. That being said, I also think that if you have some sort of unique perspective or unique take on what is maybe a classic genre, when you take somebody like Gregory Maguire, who wrote Wicked, and he turned on its head the classic fairy tale, and he was able to tell the story, a story that everybody knows through the lens of a different character, and it recast it in a way that was so engaging. So I think that that's one of the things that publishers would really vibe with. And I know I mentioned this before, but Gone Girl, which is was such a huge publishing success. Something like that, where it's like you don't see something like you didn't see the ending coming, and you have this woman who you thought was this hero, and then you realize that she's the villain of the story, or the anti-hero of the story. So turning things on its head, and then ultimately too, recognizing what the trend is in the book market and that particular marketplace, and whether it's self-helps or I'm sure now in the wake of Marie Kondo, how many tidying up books are we going to see, or organizing those, recognizing the trends, and if you have something that fits within that space, really using that to your advantage.
Totally. And if you wanted to pitch, let's say you've been working on a manuscript, you have a great idea for a story, you want to pitch that out to be considered for publication, where do you start with that process?
Sure, I think, it depends too. It depends on whether or not you're represented. I know a lot of people wonder whether or not that they should go down the route of finding a literary agent.
Yeah.
And I always suggest that if you have that capability and you have those connections, to definitely seek that out, because a lot of publishers won't consider unrepresented or unagented work. That being said, finding a lit agent isn't necessarily easy, so just kind of do your homework and kind of research around what different agents are looking for. However, if you do decide to kind of go unrepresented and give it your try, there's definitely a ton of publishing houses that are still, accepting all sorts of work. I would suggest looking into the imprints within each house. I didn't recognize this when I was first writing books, that you have My Publisher is Hachette, and that's a huge publishing company, but within it there's dozens and dozens of smaller imprints, which makes up the whole of Hachette, and different imprints focus on different genres and different types, whether that's YA or mysteries or memoirs, or my particular publisher is Seal Press, which is under the Basic Books title, and it's very girl power, and has a really strong feminist angle, and so my book fits really perfectly there. So do your homework, look into different publishers, look into the imprints, look at what they're looking for, and angle your pitches that way. Don't send some cold email across the board. Make sure it's really tailored to each different imprint, the imprint that editor is working for, and make your sales pitch on why you think your manuscript would be a really great addition to their lineup. You have any sales pitch, you have probably the first paragraph of your email to really sell them. So put it all out there, and I also think that if you're a first-time author going to a publisher, you're going to have a pretty solid body of work to show them. It's not just a couple pages of sample. You should probably have 30 to 40,000 words, I would suggest.
Yeah. And I know that we touched on it lightly, but, a literary agent, I feel really is helpful in the sense that they're helping you not just navigate this territory that you may not know, and obviously they have great connections within these publishing houses.
Sure.
But are they doing some of that pitching element for you too, and helping you get in front of the eyes that you really want to be looking at your work?
Yes, if you do have a literary agent, they're going to be the ones who are pitching it out for you. It does make it easier in some ways to make sure that editors are actually paying attention and reading it, because as a author, you might just be a one-time customer, but an agent kind of continues to come back to them, and they want to make sure that they're maintaining those relationships, so they're going to be more responsive and all of that. So that would be my suggestion, is if you can get one, but do your research too, because make sure that you're getting one that you feel you have a connection with, and that B has your best interest. You should never ever be paying anybody to represent you. Traditionally, a literary agent will take between 10 to 15% of whatever you're making on your copy, but you'll never be paying them to represent you. So make sure.
That's good info.
Yeah.
That's good to know. So what are some of the tips and pitfalls that you've been made aware of when negotiating a deal for your book with the publisher?
Sure. I mean, because I've worked with a lot of high-profile people, I realize that I am nobody. So
You matter.
Thank you. But as a result of like having these high-profile people, I realized that once you get down to the nitty-gritty, and I sold my book to a publisher, I don't have a ton of say once it goes into their hands. I write the book, and my editor specifically has been incredible, and my publishing house has been incredible, but they also had very firm ideas on how they saw my book marketing, and how they saw it designed, and how they saw the title and subtitle, and ultimately, like, they're taking on the risk. They're the ones who are paying for it to go to press. They're the ones who are paying to distribute it. They're the ones who are, taking on all of that financial burden. So they want to have a say. My suggestion would be to people that if there is something that is a deal breaker for you, that you need to shout that from the rooftops early on, and that might mean that the deal falls to pieces. But if it's going to, like I said, if it's going to be like a total game changer for you, that you need to just be really clear up front.
Yeah. So you've successfully locked in a publisher, you've inked the deal, you feel good about that, everything seems to be dialed in that space. What happens next?
Well, for me, that's when I had to write the book.
Just that.
Right?
Just that part.
Which is so funny because I took like a year to write this book proposal, and it was a pretty well thought out proposal, but like then when it came time to write it, I had like 4 months to write it, and I had a newborn at home, and I was like, curse word, like I need to do this right now. So then depending on you as a writer, and depending on your editor, if you're working with a publisher, they might be more hands off.
Yeah.
They might kind of let you do your thing and say, come to me when you have, the bulk of your work done. Or they'll want to be kind of seeing pages as you're doing that. So whatever's going to work best for you as the writer, just be really upfront about that. But I wrote it, and then it goes through kind of edit process. My editor took a look at it, kind of with some big notes for the first round. We came back, we did another draft, and then it was more kind of getting into the nitty-gritty. And then it went to copy, which means the copy editor is looking for inconsistencies, grammar, factual things. They're like double checking. They are your fact checker. They are your grammar police.
The comma splice police.
Yes, all of it. Making sure I have a tendency to repeat myself when I want to make a point, calling all of that out. And then it goes through like 2 more rounds of like just double checking and double checking and double checking. And then you start designing the book, and you start designing the pages and the cover and subtitle and title if that's not already firm. And then finally, after like 6 or 7 months of going through this process, for me is when we finally are going to print.
Yeah.
I have one last going over with a fine-tooth comb read, and then it goes off to the press.
Amazing.
I know, very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a little bit of a misconception is like getting the deal is the hardest part, but actually the work starts once the deal is inked.
Yes. I mean, it's a lot longer of a process than I thought it would be, and I thought that writing the book was going to be the bulk of it too, but really it was the kind of going over and going over and going over, because once you do, for me, I'm lucky enough to have a publisher that, has some really great and strong ideas, and like getting it to a place where everybody feels like this is the book that's going to be the most, that would make the most impact, or really do well and connect with people.
Right. And I mean, the goal at the end of the day is to sell the book.
Sure.
So you definitely need to keep dialing it in until you get to a place where all parties involved go like, oh yeah, this is the story that I wanted to tell in my voice that is authentic, but is also going to result in some sales and the bottom line.
100%. And they think that having sometimes, there is a benefit to having a lot of cooks in the kitchen where they're able to relate and say, this isn't connecting with people, or this is too strong, or we need to amp this up, and like push me out of my comfort zone, because as a writer I get very you can get very laser focused and tunnel vision. So having people sort of shake things up and kind of question me and cause me to sort of think outside of my world. It's always helpful to get fresh eyes and new eyes on your content, regardless if it's for a book or an article or even if something, like
or
a
video.
Video.
Always,
or
fresh eyes are great.
Or an Instagram post. It's having somebody to kind of shake you out of your normal.
Totally, and just a different lens. Like they're just looking at it through a different lens. And when you're in it and you're in the granular of it, it is easy to get tunnel vision and to get baked down in there. And sometimes you just need to get pulled out and sort of brought up and like, oh, I never even thought about it like that. I never even saw it that way. And it's such a refreshing thing. And sometimes it can take content that's already really great and really help it sing and help it shine.
Yes.
It just needed that slight little tweak.
Yes.
And it's in a great place.
Yeah, and that's the goal, because I think that sometimes too, we want to make sure that as a writer that I'm connecting with people who aren't just in my orbit, but are in so many different orbits. Like I want to be able to connect to, women in every part of the country, different, from different cultures and different, But that's okay. But so being able to have different eyes would be so helpful.
Love that. Sorry, it's like going dark and I don't know why. Whatever. It's just being weird. Anyway, come over here. Okay, so let's get back to talking about the title of the book. So we touched on it a little bit before. I think titles are so important. It's like a headline. It's really the thing that's catching the consumer.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit about what you were thinking about when you're crafting a title, how you get to that place, what goes into the process of settling on the final title.
Yes.
All that.
I mean, the title is really like your first impression, right? It's your first opportunity to grab a audience. And it's the same thing like you would do for when I was working in magazines and you're thinking of headlines, whether it's for in print or you're really trying to get somebody to click on your, online. It's sort of, like how people relate it now to like Instagram. It's like you want them to like really have your image grab them. It's the same thing with the title and the words. Like you just want them to grab them out of, there's so much noise, you want them to be able to connect with it. So for me, I went through a couple different iterations and I really used I focus grouped all of my friends. I'm like, here's a bunch that I'm thinking, like, let's whiteboard this, like, let's talk this out. And ultimately, too, I think that a great thing or a great suggestion I would have would be to go to your bookstore and see what's selling. Like there are always trends in any marketplace, and even with titles, there are trends that go on. I think Urban Outfitters does an amazing job at buying books with like really awesome, really catching titles. They have a lot of text-focused covers and books that they sell. So that would be my suggestion, is just to get out there and like see what's selling, see what people are buying, and ultimately, like if you're a writer, odds are you're a reader. So what grabs you? What would you buy? I like to print it out. I like to have my title up. I like to stick it on a board or a wall and like read it for a while and just like let it like live in the title. And I think something too that's like that either turns like a common phrase on its nose, like you had the book like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies that did really well, or like something unexpected, or something that could be maybe a little bit like off-putting, like the I'm forgetting it now, but like the subtle art of not giving things like that. You just don't want it to feel. It's your first impression and you don't want it to fall flat. So take your time with it.
Yeah. And I think, I like what you said, that you used your prints as a sounding board. You were writing it out. You were whiteboarding it. You were writing it, putting it on the wall, looking at it for a few days. Like, seeing how you felt about it when you came back to it 3 days later, 4 days later.
Yes.
And like, is it still resonating? Is it still creating some sort of feeling and emotion in you? Because you want the consumer to walk past the table to see your book and to take a pause.
Yes.
to engage with it. And that ultimately is what's going to lead to the sale of it.
Yes. And like, listen, I think it's like with anything, like as a writer, like I wanted it to be that like aha moment of like, I found exactly what I wanted. It's like when you're, for those of you who have ever gone wedding dress shopping, like you want to be able to put on the dress and like the tears fall down your face. But like chances are like you're going to go through 100 different iterations and you're going to waffle and you're going to try to figure it out and then you're going to have to come back to it. So not necessarily being married to like this, it has to ring church bells for me. Like go through the process with it, like get in the weeds with it, tumble it around, deconstruct it, put it together different ways.
I love that. So smart. I'm just going to fix the camera real quick before we keep going. Sorry, it's making me crazy. So much better. Oh my goodness. There we go.
I wish you guys could see this view. It's so beautiful. We're staring at
sitting like right by the ocean.
It's very beautiful.
Our hats off to the Strand House for beautiful views.
Yes.
They have all the nice views.
They win.
So before we jump off the title too far, I know that you were saying how important it is to have something catchy, and that's something that you think about when you're crafting for your Instagram or for social.
Totally.
Are there any tips or tricks that you use when you're writing a post to help that post be engaging, to help people communicate with it, to feel connected to it, to stop and engage? Because there's so much content and it's so easy to just scroll.
Yes. I mean, when it comes to Instagram, I have this sort of, I think as we all do, have this like love and hate towards it, because I always like, you want to be engaging and you need to make sure that for me, I need to make sure that I'm putting out content at like a pretty good, a decent amount. But then the pressure of like, what am I going to write? What am I going to talk about? And I think probably most of you guys can relate to that. Like, what caption should I use? So for me, what I really try to do is I try to tap into what I'm feeling at that moment, because my platform is all about speaking with mothers and being honest about the journey with motherhood. So I try to be honest about what I'm feeling at that time. When I try to force something, it always falls flat. Always falls flat. But when I'm really honest and open and I try to have a conversation and I try to engage my followers in a conversation, that's when I feel like I get the most engagement and I feel like I get the best response. So my suggestion would be, think about what you want to say. I tell people to record themselves telling that caption or that story, which sounds so silly, but you can like download an app on your phone for free. Record yourself, listen to it back, write out the story, like type it out, transcribe it, and then read how you would say it. And that's how the caption, the way that you should write the caption for your followers, because ultimately you're going on Instagram to create, for most of us, to have a sense of community. And when you're talking to people and like these, I feel like I read these captions that are like so overly formal and like verbose and flowery and just like feel like so disconnected. That's when I'm like, okay, pass. Like I'm done.
I know for me that I tend to go into the world of writing in a more formal way, because professionally I've had to write formally for so long, and it's like when I start writing in that way, it's like my brain shifts gears, and I actively have to try to shift out of that and get back into a more conversational place. And I have found that like listening to it, reading it out loud, hearing how it's sounding, usually is a great red flag of being like, this isn't a medical journal, this is Instagram. Slow your roll. Like, say it the way that you'd actually say
it. And I feel like that's a hard thing that like, for like yourself and for most companies that are trying to go into the Instagram space, it's like Instagram is like a culture of casual. So when you're connecting with people and you're kind of doing it in those more formal ways, it kind of like, it reads as a little bit like, disconnected or off. So, and I feel like so many of the brands that are really nailing it are like really leaning into it and like having a lot of fun and like calling it for what it is, instead of like, they're identifying the elephant in the room and they're like playing with the fact that they are on Instagram, and they're tongue-in-cheek and wink about it, because you can exist in two things, right? Like you can be as a brand, you can be a part of Instagram and have that wink, nudge, but then when you're back into your more professional setting, like in your content and your copy, there can be more formal.
I love that. I think that's a really important point. I think it's it's a really smart observation. And I think brands that are killing it aren't afraid to recognize who they are, that maybe they're not for everyone, which I think as a brand is really scary territory. Especially historically, they've tried to be all things to all people at all times. And recognizing that it's okay to be you. And it's okay to have your community be authentic that way, that you can be a little more tongue-in-cheek, that you can be a little more off the cuff, that it doesn't have to be so perfect. But on your website, on your landing page, you can be a lot more buttoned up. You can be a lot more client-facing, you know?
Yes.
And Instagram can be more like a chat with a girlfriend.
Yes, and I feel like that, like you said, the companies that are really doing that well are recognizing that and realizing that you can have your cake and eat it too, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. So you've written the book.
Yes.
You've gotten the title.
Yes.
It's gone out for its final publication.
Yes.
What happens around the publicity of this book and getting it out to market and getting it sold?
Yes. So that's something that's the challenge for most, especially first-time writers, right? So when I decided to write this book, it was 2015, and I remember telling my agent at the time, I want to write a book on motherhood, and he said, okay, well, you're not an expert, and you don't have any sort of like, you're not a personality, so who the hell is going to buy your book? So he suggested either I go get like my doctorate in early childhood education, which wasn't going to happen, or option B, like create a social media platform. So I spent about 2 years developing my social platform and my website, and started writing and for different parenting sites, and really submerging myself in the motherhood parenthood community, because I knew once I eventually wrote a book that I would have to promote it and get people to buy it. So I created a platform first. So for me, I'm able to really call on my community, whether it's for me, hustling to get out to different motherhood platforms and sites and newspapers and whatever to speak about this, because I've been able to now create a career speaking with some level of expertise about this. So pushing it out that way, I think that recognizing for anybody who's trying to promote their work, recognizing the vertical in which you're in and really just ingratiating yourself with it, whether it's car mechanics or self-help or whatever it is, get in that community and do as much as you can within it, because when you do come time to promote whatever you're doing, you sort of have that, you can kind of have that call to arms within your network. So that's what I'm doing right now. There's definitely anything, you don't want to overly saturate everybody with it. So there's a bit of a push and pull. But yeah, and if anybody else has tips on how I can get people to buy my book, I would be forever indebted.
Well, and I think that something that is important to bring up is that this is a process. It's a process to find the right publisher. It's a process to write the book. It's a process to take it through edit. It's a process to build a community. I know it's so easy on Instagram to you only ever see the finished products. You only ever see that moment when it's finally all done, and you sort of miss out on how long that journey took to get to that place.
Yeah.
So I think it is important to sort of remember that it doesn't happen overnight, and that just like writing the book isn't going to happen overnight. So to give yourself a little bit of grace and to try some different things, because it's probably going to take more than just one marketing push to get the book sold.
Yes.
So you've got to be willing to sort of have some flexibility in that, in the little experimentation.
Yeah. It's, for me, it'll end up being just over 3 years start to finish.
Wow.
From when I decided to create a social platform to when the book finally published. So it was definitely a journey. It was longer than I think anybody, especially my husband, wanted it to take, but the end goal's worth it all. And
totally. Well, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you want to be sure that we talk about?
I think publishing in this industry can feel so frustrating and so overwhelming to so many people.
Yeah.
But if you take somebody like like Stephanie Meyer, who wrote like the Twilight Saga, who never wrote anything in her life, and then created this like multi-million, maybe billion, I don't know, to franchise out of it. Like, if you have a great story to tell, if you have something that people you think will either engage with, find interesting, or benefit from, don't give up on it. Like, if you go through the rounds and you don't have a publisher and you want to go down the road of self-publishing, do that. Like, there is always a way to kind of make it happen. But it's a process, and like, just accept that, and like you said, give yourself grace, and just stick with it, because I think ultimately the best stories are often the ones that we have to work really, really hard to tell, because sometimes people aren't ready to hear those stories yet, but as soon as we push it out there, then it's like the walls start falling down, so stick with it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, tell everybody where they can find you, and where they can join along, and find out all about the book when it is ready to be purchased.
Thank you.
Buy it.
You can find me at Leslie Ann Bruce on Instagram, and unpacified.com is where I do all the other stuff.
Yeah, so good. And when is the book coming out?
The book will launch September 10th, and we are going to reveal the cover May 8th. And start all of our pre-sale campaigns, and there's going to be a lot of amazing, fun things that we've got in store.
So good. Well, we'll have to have you back when it publishes.
Yes, of course, please.
We'll chat all about the book at that point.
Yes.
And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I learned so much. I really didn't know all that much about book publishing, so I'm glad to learn all these things.
Neither did I before I did it. So
you got me there. I didn't know all this stuff. I read some stuff on the internet.
I did. I Googled before I got here.
Well, thank you so much for joining
you.
us. All right. Thank you, guys. It's always fun, and we'll see you next week at 12:30.